Arthur Thorne traced the deep lines on his palms with a trembling thumb. They were maps of a life spent in labor, a testament to 70 years of lifting, mending, and providing. The skin was like old parchment, dry and crisscrossed with the fine silvery scars of 100 minor injuries from the factory floor. He sat on the edge of his lumpy mattress, the only piece of furniture in the small room that was truly his, and looked at the single battered suitcase on the floor. It was mostly empty. What does a man take with him when he is leaving his entire life behind? A few worn shirts, a photograph of his late wife, Eleanor, and a small, heavy metal box she had made him promise to never lose. The air in the apartment was stale, thick with the ghosts of yesterday's fried onions and a deeper, more permanent scent of dust and damp. For 40 years, this small space had been his castle. It was here he and Eleanor had raised their boy, Julian. He remembered Julian as a small child, his laughter echoing off these very walls, bright and hopeful. He remembered the scuff marks on the baseboards from a tricycle ridden with fierce childish determination. Now, the walls were yellowed with age, the paint peeling in thin, brittle strips, and the only sound was the mournful drip of a leaky faucet in the kitchen sink. Each drop landed with a hollow plink, a tiny hammer marking the slow, painful passage of time. Today was the day. Julian was coming. His son, his successful, important son, was coming to help him move. That's what Julian had said on the phone, his voice clipped and distant, the words smoothed over with a professional courtesy that felt colder than any silence. "I've found a much better place for you, Father," he had said, quieter, simpler. "It's for the best." Arthur had wanted to ask where this new place was, what it was like, if there was a small patch of sun for the single geranium he kept on the windowsill. But the questions caught in his throat. He had learned long ago not to ask Julian questions that might inconvenience him. Instead, he had just said, "Of course, son. Whatever you think is best." He picked up the framed photograph from the nightstand. Eleanor smiled out at him, her eyes crinkling at the corners. She had been gone for 10 years, but her presence was still a warmth he could almost feel in the cold apartment. "Our boy has done so well, Artie," she would have said, her voice full of pride. And he had. Julian was a vice president at a major property development firm. He wore suits that cost more than Arthur's monthly pension. He lived in a glass tower that scraped the sky, a place Arthur had only seen in pictures. He had married a woman named Beatrice, who was as sleek and polished as the marble floors in her lobby. Arthur had tried to be proud. He truly had. He saw Julian's success as the culmination of his own life's work. Every 16-hour shift at the steel mill, every missed holiday, every sacrifice had been a stone laid in the foundation of Julian's gleaming tower. But lately, a creeping sadness had settled in his heart. The phone calls from his son grew shorter, the visits less frequent, until they stopped altogether. When Julian finally did call, it was with this news. He had sold the building. The whole block was being torn down for some new, modern development. It was a great deal, Julian had explained, a real coup for his company. He had not asked Arthur how he felt about it. He had simply informed him. A sharp, expensive car horn blared from the street below. Arthur's heart gave a nervous flutter. It was him, Julian. He took one last look around the room, at the faded floral wallpaper Eleanor had picked out, at the dent in the wall where a young Julian had thrown a baseball. He felt a profound sense of loss, a grief for the life that had been lived within these walls. He closed the suitcase, the latches clicking shut with a sound of finality. He picked up his thin, worn coat and the small metal box, tucking it carefully into the coat's deep inner pocket. It pressed against his ribs, a solid, familiar weight. Julian did not come up. He sent the driver, a large man in a black uniform, who looked at Arthur's shabby apartment with an expression of faint disdain. "Mr. Thorne is waiting in the car," the man said, his voice flat. He took the suitcase from Arthur's hand as if it were contaminated. Arthur followed him down the rickety stairs, his hand trailing along the worn banister. Each step was a small farewell. The building groaned around him, as if it too knew it was the end. The car was a long black limousine, its windows tinted to a dark, impenetrable sheen. It looked like a hearse. Arthur felt a shiver run down his spine as the driver opened the back door. Inside, Julian sat beside his wife, Beatrice. They both looked straight ahead, as if they were passengers in a taxi with a stranger. Julian was dressed in a tailored gray suit, his hair perfectly styled. Beatrice wore a cream-colored coat and pearls, her lips a slash of severe red. She did not acknowledge Arthur's presence at all. "Get in, father," Julian said, his voice impatient. He did not make eye contact. Arthur slid onto the plush leather seat, feeling grubby and out of place. The door shut, sealing them in a sterile, air-conditioned silence. The car smelled of expensive leather and Beatrice's cloying perfume. It was the smell of a world he did not belong to. The driver put his suitcase in the trunk, and with a smooth, silent surge of power, the car pulled away from the curb, leaving 40 years of memories behind in a cloud of exhaust. Arthur stared out the window at the familiar streets of his neighborhood, the corner market, the small park, the laundromat. Each landmark was a chapter in his life. He felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to say something, to bridge the cavernous silence in the car, but he didn't know what. Julian was staring at his phone, his thumb swiping across the screen with rapid, agitated movements. Beatrice was examining her fingernails, her expression one of profound boredom. "So, where are we going, son?" Arthur finally managed to ask, his voice a dry rasp. Julian didn't look up from his phone. "I told you. A new place. It's all taken care of." "Is it far?" "It's where you need to be," Beatrice said, her voice sharp and brittle. She finally turned her head and gave Arthur a cold, dismissive look. Julian has been very generous considering. Considering what? Arthur wondered. Considering he was his father? The car moved out of his neighborhood and onto the highway, picking up speed. They drove for what felt like an hour, leaving the familiar city skyline behind. The buildings grew smaller, sparser, replaced by industrial parks and empty lots. A sense of dread began to curdle in Arthur's stomach. This was not the way to any kind of home he could imagine. Finally, the car slowed and pulled into the desolate, sprawling parking lot of an intercity bus terminal. It was a grim, concrete place on the forgotten edge of town, smelling of diesel fumes and desperation. A few lonely figures huddled on benches, their faces grim. The driver got out and retrieved Arthur's suitcase from the trunk, setting it on the greasy pavement. Julian finally put his phone away and turned to his father. His face was a mask of strained indifference. "This is it, father," he said. Arthur looked from the bus station to his son's face, confusion clouding his mind. "Here? What is this place? I thought you found me a room." "This is better," Julian said, his voice low and rushed. He pulled a thin envelope of cash from his inside pocket and thrust it at Arthur. This should be enough to get you started. You can buy a ticket. Go somewhere warmer. Florida, maybe. The reality of the situation crashed down on Arthur with the force of a physical blow. He felt the air leave his lungs. They were not moving him. They were abandoning him, like a piece of old furniture that no longer fit the decor. "Julian," he whispered, his voice cracking. "What are you doing?" "It's for the best," Julian repeated, the phrase now a cruel, meaningless mantra. He couldn't meet his father's eyes. He stared at a point just past Arthur's shoulder. "Beatrice and I, our life, it's complicated. We need a fresh start. We can't have distractions." "A distraction?" Arthur felt a tear slide down his wrinkled cheek. "I'm your father. I'm a distraction?" Beatrice leaned forward, her eyes like chips of ice. "Your presence is an embarrassment, if you must know," she hissed. "People in our circle have certain standards. A father living in that hovel, in that part of town, it reflects poorly on Julian. On us." The cruelty of her words was stunning. Arthur looked at his son, pleading with his eyes for him to deny it, to say this was all some terrible mistake. But Julian remained silent, his jaw tight. He simply nodded in agreement with his wife. As the sleek black car prepared to pull away, leaving him on the cold, unforgiving pavement, a memory flooded Arthur's mind with searing clarity. It was Julian's last year of university. His scholarship had been unexpectedly cut, and he was about to be expelled, his dreams of a business degree turning to dust. Julian had come home, defeated and ashamed. Arthur had held his sobbing son and promised him everything would be all right. The next day, Arthur had taken the one valuable thing he owned, his own father's gold pocket watch, a family heirloom, and sold it. He never told Julian where the money came from, only that it was taken care of. He remembered the hollow feeling in his pocket where the watch used to be, and the simultaneous swell of pride as he handed the cash to his son, securing his future. He had sacrificed a piece of his past for Julian's future. Now, that future was driving away, leaving him with nothing but an envelope of money that felt like 30 pieces of silver. "Don't try to contact us," Julian said, his final words delivered through the closing window. "The number has been changed. It's better this way." The limousine glided away, silent and swift, disappearing down the road. Arthur stood alone on the curb, the envelope of cash in his hand, his small suitcase at his feet. A cold wind whipped around him, and the first heavy drops of a cold autumn rain began to fall. He didn't even have an umbrella. He was 70 years old, and he was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The rain turned from a sprinkle to a downpour, soaking his thin coat in minutes. The water ran down his face, mingling with his tears. He huddled under the meager overhang of the bus terminal, shivering, the damp cold seeping deep into his bones. The envelope of cash felt slick and useless in his hand. What good was money when what you needed was a hand to hold, a kind voice, a place to call home? He looked at the departures board. Buses were leaving for cities he'd never heard of, places where he knew no one. He was a castaway on a concrete island. He spent the first night on a hard plastic bench inside the terminal, his suitcase clutched to his chest. The fluorescent lights hummed endlessly, casting a sterile, sleepless glare. Every time he drifted off, the sharp bark of an announcement or the rumble of a departing bus would jolt him awake. His body ached, a deep, resonant pain in his joints that was more than just age. It was the ache of betrayal. In the morning, he used some of the money Julian had given him to buy a cup of weak, bitter coffee and a stale pastry. He ate slowly, making it last. He felt the eyes of the other people in the terminal on him, the weary travelers, the other lost souls. He saw pity in their gazes, and sometimes contempt. He pulled his collar up, trying to make himself smaller, to disappear. For a week, he drifted. He rode buses to the end of the line and back again, just to have a warm place to sit. He ate at cheap diners, nursing a single cup of coffee for hours until the staff asked him to leave. The money in the envelope dwindled with alarming speed. He tried to find a room to rent, but no one wanted a tenant with no job, no references, and a haunted look in his eyes. One afternoon, he found a payphone that still worked. His fingers, stiff with cold, fumbled with the coins. He dialed the number he knew by heart, Julian's old cell phone number. A recorded voice, cheerful and robotic, informed him the number was no longer in service. He tried again, thinking he must have misdialed. The same message. He then called the main line for Julian's company, Thorne and Sterling Development. Mr. Julian Thorne's office, a crisp, professional voice answered. Hello, Arthur said, his own voice hoarse. May I please speak to Julian? It's his father. There was a pause. He could hear the faint sound of typing. I'm sorry, sir, but Mr. Thorne has left strict instructions. He is not to be disturbed by personal calls. He is in a very important meeting. But this is an emergency, Arthur pleaded. Please, just tell him I called. I will pass along the message, the secretary said, her tone making it clear she would do no such thing. The line went dead. He didn't answer. He didn't answer the next day, or the day after that. Arthur's calls were always met with the same polite, impenetrable wall. He was being erased from his son's life, methodically and efficiently. Desperation began to set in, a cold, gnawing fear. The money was almost gone. He started skipping meals. He slept in parks, on benches, covering himself with old newspapers that did little to ward off the biting autumn wind. The smell of damp earth and decay clung to his clothes. He was becoming one of them, one of the faceless, shuffling men he used to see on the streets and feel a pang of pity for. Now he was on the other side of the glass, looking in. People hurried past him, their faces averted, their purses clutched a little tighter. He was invisible, a piece of human debris, to be stepped over and ignored. The humiliation was a constant bitter taste in his mouth. One day, in a final, desperate act, he made his way downtown to the gleaming glass tower where Julian worked. He stood across the street, a ragged figure amidst the throng of well-dressed, important people striding in and out of the building. He just wanted to see his son, to look him in the eye and ask him why. He waited for hours, the concrete cold seeping through the thin soles of his shoes. Just after 5 o'clock, he saw him. Julian emerged from the revolving doors, laughing with another man in an expensive suit. He looked powerful, confident, completely at ease in this world of wealth and influence. Arthur's heart leaped. He took a step forward, raising a hand. Julian, he called out, his voice thin and lost in the city noise. Julian's head turned. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met across the busy street. Arthur saw a flicker of recognition in his son's eyes, followed instantly by a wave of pure, unadulterated panic. Julian's smile vanished. He turned his back abruptly, said something to his companion, and quickened his pace, walking away without a backward glance. He had seen his father, ragged and begging on the street, and he had chosen to walk away. He had pretended not to know him. That was the moment something inside Arthur broke. The last, stubborn ember of hope flickered and died, leaving only cold, gray ash. He sank down onto the curb, the city blurring around him through a fresh wave of tears. He was not just homeless. He was fatherless to his own son. Meanwhile, miles away and worlds apart, Julian Thorne raised a crystal glass of champagne. The light from the chandelier overhead splintered into 1,000 tiny rainbows on its surface. He was in the penthouse apartment he shared with Beatrice, a cavernous space of white walls, minimalist furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a godlike view of the city below. To the Sterling Tower project, his father-in-law, Mr. Sterling, boomed, his voice echoing in the large room. Mr. Sterling was a bull of a man, with a florid face and an air of absolute authority. And to my son-in-law, Julian, the man who made it all happen. The small, exclusive group of dinner guests applauded. Julian smiled, a practiced, confident expression he had perfected over the years. "Thank you, Alistair. I just saw the opportunity and seized it." Beatrice, standing beside him, squeezed his arm. "My husband is too modest," she said, her voice dripping with pride. "He has a brilliant eye for potential. He saw value where everyone else just saw urban decay." The project they were celebrating was Julian's masterpiece. He had identified a block of dilapidated, low-rent buildings in a forgotten part of downtown and convinced his father-in-law's company to buy them out. His plan was to demolish the entire block and erect a state-of-the-art office and luxury residential tower, a gleaming monument to their success. It was the deal that would cement his reputation and secure his future. Later, as they sat around the long, polished dining table, Mr. Sterling leaned toward Julian. "Tell me again about your family, son. You don't speak of them much." Julian felt a familiar twinge of anxiety. This was the part he hated, the delicate dance of editing his own history. "There's not much to tell, Alistair," he said smoothly, taking a sip of wine. "My mother passed when I was young. My father, he was a simple man, a factory worker. He passed away a few years ago. He worked hard his whole life, but never had much to show for it. I'd like to think he'd be proud of what I've accomplished." He had told this lie so many times, it almost felt true. "A self-made man," Mr. Sterling said, nodding with approval. "I respect that. No handouts, no silver spoon. You built this all yourself." "Exactly," Beatrice chimed in, placing her hand over Julian's. "He pulled himself up by his bootstraps, with no help from anyone." The lie sat comfortably on his tongue, a necessary fiction to protect the pristine image he had so carefully constructed. The image of his actual father, Arthur, with his calloused hands and worn-out clothes, flashed in his mind for a moment. He pushed it away. His father was a relic of a past he had worked tirelessly to escape. He was a loose thread that could unravel the entire tapestry of his new life. That was why he had to be cut away. The brief, shocking sight of him on the street that afternoon had terrified him. It was a ghost from the past, threatening his perfect present. He took another large gulp of wine, washing the memory down. The redevelopment project was his obsession, the key to everything he wanted. He had spent months navigating the complex web of city permits and zoning laws. The final hurdle was clearing the titles for all the properties on the block. Most were straightforward. But there was one parcel, a significant chunk right in the middle, whose ownership was proving maddeningly obscure. The city records were a mess, pointing to deeds that were over a century old, with no clear line of succession. His legal team had assured him it was a clerical error, a historical anomaly that could be cleared up with a quiet title action in court. It was a minor nuisance, nothing more. He had no idea that this minor nuisance was about to bring his entire world crashing down. He had no idea that the key to it all lay in a small metal box tucked into the pocket of the man he had left at a bus station. The days blurred into a miserable, monotonous cycle for Arthur. Cold nights spent in shelters, if he was lucky enough to get a bed. Long, empty days spent walking the streets to stay warm. The city he had lived in his whole life had become a hostile, alien landscape. He was hungry, he was tired, and he was losing hope. He clutched the metal box in his pocket. It was his only remaining link to his past, to Eleanor. He didn't even know what was inside. She had just told him it contained the family's roots and that it was important. He had never had a reason to open it. It was just a keepsake, a memory. One particularly cold evening, as he huddled on a park bench trying to shield himself from a biting wind, a young man approached him. He was carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. "You look like you could use this more than me," the man said, offering Arthur one of the cups. Arthur looked up, suspicious. Kindness was a rare currency on these streets. The young man had a friendly, open face and kind eyes. He was dressed in a simple but clean suit. "Thank you," Arthur mumbled, taking the cup with numb fingers. The warmth spread through his hands, a small, forgotten comfort. "My name is Elias," the man said, sitting down on the other end of the bench. "I'm a lawyer. I run a small legal aid clinic for the homeless just around the corner. We have some cots set up in the back if you need a warm place to sleep tonight." Arthur looked at him, searching for the catch. There was always a catch, but Elias's expression was one of genuine concern. For the first time in weeks, someone was looking at him like he was a human being. A dam of emotion broke inside him, and he began to cry, silent tears tracking paths through the grime on his face. Elias didn't say anything. He just sat with him, letting him cry. When Arthur had composed himself, he began to talk. The whole sordid story came pouring out. His son, the apartment, the bus station, the humiliation. Elias listened patiently, his expression growing more somber with each word. "That's just inhuman," Elias said when Arthur had finished. "No one should be treated that way, especially by their own family." He took Arthur to the clinic, a small, warm, brightly lit space that felt like a sanctuary. He gave him a clean cot, a blanket, and a simple, hot meal of soup and bread. It was the most delicious thing Arthur had ever tasted. Over the next few days, Arthur began to trust the young lawyer. Elias was different. He didn't offer pity. He offered respect. He asked Arthur about his life, about his work at the factory, about Eleanor. He helped Arthur get a proper shower and a change of clean, donated clothes. Slowly, Arthur began to feel a flicker of his old self returning. One evening, as they were talking, Arthur mentioned the metal box. "My wife, she always said it was important," he said, pulling it from his coat. "I don't even have the key." Elias looked at the old, slightly rusted box with interest. "It looks like a simple lock. Let me see." He fetched a small toolkit from his office and, with a bit of gentle probing, managed to pick the lock. The lid creaked open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, thick yellowish envelope. It was tied with a faded ribbon. Arthur's hands trembled as he lifted it out. He untied the ribbon and carefully unfolded the documents inside. They were old, written in an elegant looping script he could barely decipher. There were maps, deeds, and legal papers bearing signatures and seals from the late 1800s. "What is all this?" Arthur asked, bewildered. Elias took one of the documents and began to read, his brow furrowed in concentration. His eyes slowly widened. He picked up another, then another, spreading them out on the table. He let out a low whistle. "Arthur," he said, his voice filled with a strange mix of excitement and disbelief. "Do you have any idea what these are?" "No," Arthur said. "Just some old family papers, I suppose." "They're a bit more than that," Elias said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "According to these deeds, your great-grandfather, a man named Silas Thorne, purchased a significant tract of land in what was then the outskirts of the city. These are the original freehold titles. They've been passed down through your family ever since." He pointed to a map. "And that land, Arthur, it's not the outskirts anymore. It's right in the heart of downtown." Elias pulled out a modern city map and laid it next to the old one. He traced a block with his finger. "This is it," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "The entire block. The one that Thorne and Sterling Development is trying to build their new tower on." Arthur stared at him, uncomprehending. "What are you saying?" Elias looked him directly in the eye. "I'm saying, Arthur, that you don't just own a piece of it. According to these papers, which appear to be legally ironclad, you own the entire thing. You're not a beggar. You're the landlord, and your son is about to build his crowning achievement on your property without your permission." The news was too immense, too world-altering for Arthur to fully grasp. He felt dizzy, a strange sense of unreality washing over him. He, Arthur Thorne, the forgotten old man, owned half the city? It was impossible. He looked down at his worn, cracked hands. These were not the hands of a wealthy man, but the papers were there, solid and real on the table in front of him. Elias worked through the night, verifying the documents, cross-referencing them with city archives. By morning, he was certain. The Thorne family's claim was unbreakable. "We need to act fast," Elias said, his eyes bright with purpose. "First thing tomorrow, we file an injunction to halt all demolition and construction. We send a cease and desist letter to Thorne and Sterling. We let them know the real owner has come forward." "My son," Arthur whispered. "What will this do to Julian?" Elias's expression softened. "He brought this on himself, Arthur. He tried to throw you away. He's about to find out that what he threw away was the key to everything he ever wanted." The injunction hit Thorne and Sterling Development like a thunderbolt. All work on the Sterling Tower project came to an immediate grinding halt. Julian was in a board meeting, boasting about their aggressive construction timeline, when his assistant burst in, her face pale. She handed him a legal document. He read the first page, then the second. The color drained from his face. An injunction, a claim of primary ownership, filed on behalf of a Mr. Arthur Thorne. The name seemed to mock him from the page. It couldn't be. It was a coincidence. Some other Arthur Thorne. It had to be, but it wasn't. Within hours, the story was leaked to the press. A reclusive, long-lost heir had emerged to claim ownership of the valuable downtown block. The media frenzy was instantaneous. The company's stock plummeted. Their primary investors, spooked by the legal quagmire and the whiff of scandal, began pulling their funding. Mr. Sterling summoned Julian to his office. His face was purple with rage. "What is this disaster?" he roared, slamming the injunction papers down on his massive desk. "Who is this Arthur Thorne? And how did our legal team miss this?" Julian was sweating, his expensive suit suddenly feeling tight and suffocating. "I don't know, Alistair. It must be some kind of mistake, a fraud." "A fraud!" Sterling bellowed. "Our lawyers have seen the deeds. They're real. We are ruined. This project is dead, and we are facing lawsuits that will bankrupt us. And it all happened on your watch." The final, devastating blow came that evening. A reporter, digging into the story, uncovered the truth. The mysterious landowner, Arthur Thorne, was not some distant heir. He was Julian Thorne's own father, a man Julian had claimed was dead, a man who, until recently, had been living on the streets. The scandal exploded. It was a story almost too perfect in its cruel irony. The ruthless developer who disowned his poor father, only to discover that father owned the very land he was trying to seize. Julian became a pariah overnight. When he got home, Beatrice was packing her bags. Her face was a mask of cold fury. "You lied to me," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "You lied to my father. You told us he was dead." "Beatrice, please, I can explain." "Explain what?" she shrieked, her composure finally cracking. "That you're the son of a homeless beggar? That you've made us the laughingstock of the entire city? My father is ruined. Our reputation is destroyed. I will not be dragged down with you." She snapped her suitcase shut and pushed past him without another word. The door slammed behind her, the sound echoing the finality of his ruin. The next day, he was fired. His name was scrubbed from the company letterhead. His corporate accounts were frozen. He was left with nothing but crippling debt and public disgrace. He lost the penthouse, the cars, everything. Within a week, he was the one with no place to go, wandering the same streets he had seen his father on, a ghost in his own life. The realization of what he had done, what he had lost, settled on him, not as a sudden epiphany, but as a slow, crushing weight. He had thrown away his father, and in doing so, he had thrown away everything. His only hope, the only person in the world who might possibly help him, was the man he had left for dead. He had to find him. He had to beg for his forgiveness. Julian found his father not in a mansion or a luxury suite, but back in his old neighborhood. The building that was supposed to be a pile of rubble was now covered in scaffolding, but it was for restoration, not demolition. Through Elias, Arthur had used a fraction of his newfound resources to buy back the entire building, not just for himself, but for the other tenants who had been displaced. He saw Arthur sitting on the front stoop, the same stoop where Julian had once waited for him to come home from the factory. He was wearing a simple, clean sweater and drinking a cup of tea. He looked peaceful. The deep lines of sorrow on his face seemed to have softened. He was no longer a ghost. He was solid, real, and dignified. Julian approached slowly, his own clothes now rumpled and stained, his face unshaven. He was a mirror image of the man his father had been just weeks before. When Arthur looked up and saw him, there was no shock in his eyes, only a profound, weary sadness. Julian fell to his knees on the pavement in front of his father. The rough concrete scraped his skin. "Father," he choked out, the word feeling foreign and shameful on his tongue. "Father, I am so sorry." Sobs racked his body. "I made a terrible mistake. A horrible, unforgivable mistake. Please, you have to help me." They took everything. Beatrice left me. I have nothing. I have nowhere to go. His apology was a litany of his own losses, a plea for his own salvation. Arthur looked down at his son, his weeping, broken son, and felt not anger, but a deep, hollow ache. He did not ask him to stand. He let him kneel. He took a slow sip of his tea, the silent stretching between them, punctuated only by Julian's desperate sobs. Finally, Arthur spoke, his voice quiet but clear, carrying in the still afternoon air. "I remember when you were 7, he began, his gaze distant, looking at a memory. "You wanted a bicycle more than anything in the world, a red one we saw in a shop window. It was too expensive. We couldn't afford it. So for 6 months, I took on extra shifts at the mill. I worked doubles until my hands bled and my back felt like it would snap. I saved every extra penny. On your birthday, when you saw that red bicycle, your face, it was like the sun had come out. That was all the payment I ever needed." He paused, his eyes returning to his son. "I remember selling your grandfather's watch to pay for your university tuition. I told you it was a grant. I didn't want you to feel indebted. I wanted you to feel free to build your own life. Every sacrifice, Julian, every long hour, every meal I skipped so you could have more, they were not burdens. They were gifts. They were my joy. Because you were my son." Arthur's voice grew stronger, firmer, cutting through Julian's weeping. "When you left me at that bus station, in the rain, you didn't just take away my home. You took all those memories, all those sacrifices, and you told me they were worthless. When you looked at me on that street and you turned away, you looked at me like I was garbage. I wasn't asking for your money, Julian. I was never asking for your fortune. I was just asking for a son." He set his teacup down on the stoop beside him. "You come to me now, when you have nothing left, and you ask for my help. But what you are really asking for is my money. You are asking me to fix the life that your own greed and cruelty destroyed." Julian looked up, his face streaked with tears and dirt. "No, Father, I swear. I've changed. I see it all now." Arthur shook his head slowly. "I hope that's true. For your sake, I truly do. And in my heart, in the part of me that will always be your father, I forgive you." He took a deep breath. "But I cannot let you back into my life. The trust is gone. The son I raised, the boy who loved red bicycles, he is gone. You are a stranger to me now, a stranger who wears his face. You must learn to build a life on your own, Julian. Not with my money, but with your own 2 hands. You must find your own way back." He stood up, his old joints protesting, and looked down at his kneeling son one last time. There was no hatred in his eyes, only a vast, empty sorrow for what had been lost. He turned and walked into the building, closing the front door behind him. The click of the latch was soft, but it was as final as a tomb sealing shut. The final scene of Arthur's life was not one of lonely opulence. He turned the newly restored building into a foundation, a place of refuge for the city's homeless and forgotten. It was run by Elias, who had become the son Arthur had lost. It offered shelter, hot meals, and free legal counsel. Arthur lived in his old simple apartment upstairs. He spent his days in the communal garden on the roof. His hands, once covered in factory grease, now dark with rich soil. He was surrounded by people who were grateful for his kindness, people who saw him for who he was. He was often alone, but he was never lonely. He would stand at his window, holding a simple cup of coffee, and look out over the city. It was his city, not because he owned a piece of it, but because he had chosen to care for its most vulnerable people. He had found his peace. Julian ended up where he began. He stood in the rain at the same desolate bus terminal where he had abandoned his father. He was holding a one-way ticket to a place he didn't know, paid for with the last of his money. He was ragged, he was broken, and he was completely alone. He had become the ghost he had so feared, a living monument to his own failure. He had gained the whole world, and in the process, he had lost the only thing that ever truly mattered. Because a house built on a foundation of lies will always crumble, and the wealth that matters is not the kind that can be counted, but the kind that is given away. Life, in the end, always collects its debts.